So I wonder if this is working. Yeah, looks like it's working. What did you have for breakfast today?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal. कुछ अच्छा डोसा वगैरह नहीं बनाया कुछ
अपने
बढ़िया
अपने लिए
सिर्फ डोसा ओटमील से हो गया हेल्दी
जो भी हो आसान.
Okay, well, it's picking up. It'll be fine. Um, so, but of course, we'll begin with who you are, right? I mean, I have here some notes on you. So just we'll probably start with say, welcome to University of Washington. What are you doing here? And then some sense about that. We'll talk a little bit about the project, which will automatically lead to your work in economics, and then he'll say, but we're music. And I'll say, well, I'm more interested in the music thing, obviously, and how is it that you're into the arts, and from a very rigorous economic leftist perspective, how did you get into the arts? And then you can talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can talk about your books or your maybe not so much on your books, some on your books, but I'm very interested on this new book that is coming out. I've not read it or seen it or anything, but I'm very this ensemble project, Africa, India, pre-colonial.
Yeah.
Definitely, we talk a little bit about that, particularly in terms of music. But we can produce some prehistory, but talk about the ensemble, what you're trying to achieve there. What do you mean by not fusion music, but iska matlab kya hua, aisa waisa. And then we can drill down somewhere in there. I'll try and find cues about, I'll try and insert architecture all the time.
Absolutely.
And I'll say, but isn't that, won't you think, what
Is
about
it
the
bricks
music?
or mortar or neither? Yeah.
So we can and I would love it if you freely speculate and say, no, I disagree, no, or whatever.
Yeah.
Just try and not feel like it's an interview or something.
Yeah.
Okay? It's just a podcast. The whole thing will be edited, needless to say. And we'll publish it as soon as possible. And generally I get about 1,000 to 1,500 unique downloads worldwide.
That's great.
A lot in India also. So there'll be a little audience for it. And I've never really surveyed what my audience is. So I can't really say whether they're architects or non-architects or people like that. I try and have this conversational character, which means that I will probably interrupt you 2-3 times minimum.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's only because I'm trying to
Yeah.
make the listeners feel like we are gappe maar rahe hain. And I'll have to keep an eye on things over here.
Yeah,
so if I'm looking over here, that doesn't mean
You're not listening.
I'm not listening.
That's okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And where's your coffee? Oh, I wanted the coffee. All right. So it's a short. Do you want me to run it one more time and give you more water?
Little water will help. Yeah.
Yeah. है ना?
Yeah.
Let's give it a minute. That's the aspiration.
This is a nice little machine.
It's inconvenient for office space. No?
Yeah. It's.
So it does Nespresso, which is to say it's not
Yeah.
instant.
Yeah.
But it does, you do need the capsules,
Yeah, the pods or whatever.
the
right?
pods.
Yeah.
So these are not recyclable or anything.
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
Yeah. you.
Yeah. I have some of this oat milk if you need.
This is fine.
ठीक है? Black चलेगा?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, let's just get set up here. Okay. That's an interesting lecture the other day at in the that woman from Chicago. Was she? Where did she
Yeah,
come
yeah,
from?
yeah. So,
Oh,
yeah, I think she got
something.
Yeah.
over there.
Naisargi.
Huh? Nesargi.
Nice,
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you know her from before?
No,
Have you know her work?
no,
I haven't either.
no.
Hello. Why is this level so low? It really bothers me. That's why I prefer the phone, because I can control everything. And I don't have the proper software. Chalega. She'll fix it. The editor will fix the volumes. ठीक है. शुरू करें? Okay. Well, Sumangala, welcome to Architecture Talk. It's such a pleasure to have you here and to have this conversation with you. I hope you're a visiting Fulbright scholar here at the University of Washington. Yes. When did you get here, and how long are you going to be here?
Yeah, I arrived in mid-December, and in the middle of peak winter, and
Peak winter.
I'm going to be here.
The amazing
till-
Seattle winter.
Absolutely, yeah, and I'm going to be here till early summer.
Right.
uh,
Right.
If that is early summer. Just before mid-June, I'm
Just-
going to go back to India.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, you and I were talking earlier, and I recommended you're missing the best weather
Yes, that's
in
right.
Seattle, but
Yeah.
you have commitments. But
Yeah.
I was really fascinated because I happened to have the opportunity to come and see your concert, the fantastic, what do you call it?
Music and social movements in India.
Music and social movement in India, but your performance lecture.
Yeah.
It's called a performance lecture.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a unique thing because you introduce the music you're singing and then you sing it. And that seems to me an analog of your life and career, that you are both a scholar, a historian, an economist with deep roots in leftist movements, and a musician. Yes?
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit more about what is it, this duality that you straddle, and what's going on here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I'm joking about it, I call it a kind of schizophrenic existence. It's really these two realities that I live in, but in a certain sense, it's not that separate either. So it's basically, I think, straddling a wide range in the social sciences and humanities.
Yeah.
And with everything
And the
that
arts,
comes-
no, you forgot the arts.
Yeah, well, I'm saying humanities in a larger sense. So, yeah. So the economics part of it is, of course, is formal career related. My degrees are all in economics, and I've taught economics for a very long time.
Yeah.
But then even within economics, I did not really do a lot of core economics. You know, what would be considered acceptable economics in economics departments in many parts of the world.
I see.
Whereas I moved broadly to what is now called development studies.
Right.
So
No, but it's still economics. I mean,
is
you're
economics.
from a deeply leftist perspective, but
Yeah.
it's still economics.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not neoliberalism or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I've sort of gone into development studies. My
Yeah.
own work in economics straddles sociology and politics, of course,
Yeah.
and anthropology to some extent.
Right.
So that's the purely academic part.
Okay.
I've also been involved, to some extent in policy making in India,
Right.
At various points, and the music side actually comes apart from training from childhood.
Yeah, it says here you're trained in Carnatic and Hindustani music. So
Yeah.
how did this is just your parents pushing you into music,
Well,
or was
yes,
something like
yes, to some extent, yeah. So, growing up in a kind of South Indian household,
that? Oh,
if the kid has a decent voice, then you put the kid through training. So that's how I got into Carnatic music, and then later on, from my teenage onwards, into Hindustani, because I'd moved to Delhi by then.
I see.
And so I've had basic training in these classical systems, but
Okay.
I don't perform. I'm not capable enough.
What
of
do you mean?
performing.
You just performed. I just attended your concert.
Yeah, no, not classical concerts. That's what I mean.
Classically.
Yeah, not classical concerts. So,
But you're trained classically.
yeah, but I'm trained classically.
Yeah.
I mean, I've taken enough training for the voice, to be trained.
Yeah.
Enough to perform. So, but that was there. I mean, that was part of growing up.
Oh.
But I've been an activist. So I've been involved with what one might call the protest song movement in India. So which was like the street song movement in Delhi, which was like a parallel to the street theatre movement. So from the early 80s onwards, I was involved with a group called Parcham in Delhi.
Parcham. Okay.
Yeah, which is a protest song group,
Oh.
and so people from different walks of life came together to.
No, so what I'm hearing is that you're telling me that your sort of interest in music and performance is directly connected to sort of the idea of music as a form of protest.
Yeah, to begin with, I would
To
say.
begin with.
Because
But
I
somewhere
was
in the back there must be basic love for music also. No?
Yes, exactly. So so I mean, I've always loved music. It's just that I wasn't disciplined enough to become a classical musician. But I've always had the music has always been around in the home, and with my family, and especially with my brother. So we would be listening to Akashvani Vivid Bharati. So film music obviously was a big.
We
big
all grew up
influence.
with film music. No?
Film music, yeah. I mean, for me, in not Hindi primarily, but also Malayalam, which is my mother tongue.
Yeah.
And also growing up in Hyderabad, Telugu, and all of that.
Yeah,
So film music was there. So music is very much part of the growing up.
Right.
And so I was very interested and imitative. Also, I used to sing a lot of that stuff in competitions in school, and
I see.
trying to sing
And
like
winning
that.
prizes all the time.
Very often. Yes. So trying to sing like Lata Mangeshkar or Asha Bhosle.
Who do you prefer, Lata Mangeshkar or Asha? Asha,
Yes.
the sweet mellifluous voice.
Yes, yeah.
Of course, Asha ji.
Yeah. So that was there, and then when I started singing with this group, then this whole exposure to songs which have been written with a purpose.
Yeah.
Even if they might not all be very serious songs, but songs which were written as part of social movements at different parts of Indian history, and and then also the experience with the kind of singing and something that you're interested in, which is space. The spaces in which one performs. So then you need to really be able to sing in all kinds of spaces without amplification, without technological amplification.
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you sing on the street?
Yeah, so that's something that you need to learn, and also I was also in college. Once I got into my undergraduate degree, I founded a music society in Delhi University, which became one of the foremost music societies, and which has produced a lot of stars today.
I see.
Who are commercially very successful and all of that, and it is called MUSOC, which is a music society of Kirodimal College.
Okay.
And so there was my first exposure to actually training people in choir singing.
I see.
Again, space. So how do you actually work with spatiality and how people are placed with respect to each other and in relation to the the
performance space.
The performance space.
No, but here you're talking about proper theatres and auditoriums with acoustics.
Yeah. So but then you have to work going beyond just the individual's relationship to the voice or whatever it is.
You've got a sort of ensemble.
How do you actually put people together and figure out what this space,
I see.
spatiality means in music.
Right.
So another version of that happens on the street. Really. First of all, often we used to be singing through really terrible equipment. Those mics which are not meant for anything, leave alone music. But they were mostly those, speech mics. Those
Right.
mics.
Yeah, they are sort of a high pitched. Yeah.
And you really struggle to actually sing through them.
Yeah.
So or often it would be just as part of a street theater performance or something where it was just voice. And then so you had to work through how to throw the voice and how to modulate it in a way in which it wouldn't split, but at the same time would reach the audience. And so
what's the secret?
There's no secret. I guess it involves a lot of breath. And you have to conserve. So how do you, and that's what modulation means. So how do you learn to conserve the voice against the elements?
Right.
So often we would be performing in spaces which had a lot of dust, and of course, as we say in Hindi, gala baith jata tha.
After some time,
you go hoarse, but how long can you prevent that?
Right.
So that is really a function of how much you can keep control over what happens with the body.
I see.
And what happens with the head and the chest and so on. So,
right.
So in retrospect, I can say that I was working with all these things, and these are things that I started thinking about much more seriously, much later, about the relationship between voice and space, and the thing about producing voice.
What do you mean you started to think about it later? What happened later? Why did you?
Later, once I started also doing a lot of academic work on music, but all the academic work that I've done is related to performativity.
I see.
And to my own experience with performance.
I see.
So this whole thing of voice production techniques,
right?
How they differ across cultures,
right?
How they differ across producing the Asha Bhosle voice versus producing a Begum Akhtar voice.
Yeah. Totally different. Yes.
But those those are part of training and experience which go into which can also be understood theoretically to some extent. So as I've started thinking about voice, music, musical systems, comparing different kinds of musical systems and so on, I've also thought a lot through these issues of voice production, and it's from my own experience as a performer that a lot of these questions are addressed.
So here's a crazy question, do you have like a favorite kind of space to perform in?
To perform?
If you had to ideally pick?
Well, I guess the best places to perform would be something that has good acoustics on its own.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So
a fine theater or a fine small performance space.
Yeah. Of course, an opera house. I've never performed in an opera house, but smaller versions of it.
Right.
Where voice bounces off the walls in ways in which it amplifies. Yeah. But it's also wonderful to perform into a really good mic.
Oh, really?
That
really sort of lifts it.
It elevates the experience in different ways, because there's not much effort involved.
Yeah.
But again, that involves a lot of working with voice, to be able to modulate it in a way in which it comes across. Right. The way you want it to come across.
Yeah, mics make a big difference. So we are not using the best mics today. This is sitting over here. But I understand what you're saying about this. Okay, so of course you some of your work is connected to IPTA, the Indian People's Theatre Association.
Yeah.
And what is it that you were looking at over there, and how did it connect to music, or is it mostly theatre and protest?
No, it was music.
It was music.
Of course it's related to theatre, because a lot of the music came out of the theatre. So for me that was a project that I took on really as a way to get back into music after a long break.
I see.
I wouldn't say a break, but at some point I wasn't singing very much. I mean, life had taken over, and
things happen. Yeah.
things happen, and since I wasn't singing for a career, or so I didn't know what to do with my singing really, but I just knew that I wanted to sing, and I'd worked with a lot of very sort of illustrious people, Safdar Hashmi, Habib Tanveer, Prasanna in theatre and all of that, and I had been exposed to a lot of wonderful music.
So you worked with these people in theatre, like you were on stage performing, acting,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, well, not exactly acting, but a lot of it was music, singing.
Oh, you were singing.
Yeah. So Habib Tanveer, and Safdar Hashmi had put up this play called Motiram Ka Satyagraha, as part of a Premchand festival.
I see.
In the late, I think it was 87 or 88.
Okay.
And that had a lot of music in it. So we were on stage singing the music like a chorus.
Right.
So
my father was a part of amateur theatre company, and I took part in a bunch of, and one I remember with a lot of music was Mohan Rakesh's Alaf Sir. I don't know if you know about that. Anyway,
okay. Well, I've heard about it.
Yeah. All right, go on.
Yeah.
So you were doing
so
this.
I had exposure to all of that, and I really knew that I wanted to do something with my music. I didn't know what. And so then I decided to actually start looking at the IPTA's music, and because when I was with Parcham, we used to be singing a lot of IPTA songs.
Okay.
And the largest part of the traditions which had come down to us, for me, were very stereotypical songs, in the sense that there was a kind of grammar that was assumed.
Okay.
That you see a protest song has to have a certain kind of a grammar. It has to be mobilizational. It has to have certain kinds of lyrics. It has to be something that everyone can sing. And so on. And but there was this one song called Jaane Wale Sipahi Se Poocho.
Yes, which you sang the other day also.
Yes, which defied that kind of stereotype.
Yes.
And it's a song that had been written in the 40s by Makhdoom Mohiuddin, and it was a highly evocative, emotive song.
I see.
And my own experience with singing that song from 1984 had shown that a song like that could just transform audiences.
Transform, but you're saying in a different way from your traditional protest kind of rouse the people song.
Yeah, it was a song which every time I sang it would have a very deeply cathartic kind of an effect, where people were very deeply moved. And I know there were some instances where that happened, and so this is a song that was always there at the back of my mind. Of course, it was a song that used to be
some instances that happened. What?
1984, after Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, and the carnage against the Sikhs broke out all over North India, and Delhi, of course, was
the epicenter.
The epicenter. So it was. So I was an undergraduate student at that time, and that was one of the first instances, I would say, where the citizens' initiative started, against communalism, for peace and things like that. And so one of those initiatives had actually organized a march through Delhi University to end at Khalsa College, because Khalsa College was a safe space for the Sikhs.
Right.
And so many people in the Sikh community, young men, wanted to actually go out and take revenge. They were desperate. And so this was a peace march that had been called to say, don't do it. That this is what has happened is political, and if you go out and retaliate, it's not, it's going to just blow up even beyond all of this. And, but it, understandably, a lot of the young people were desperate, and they had lost so many people in their families, and they were not willing to listen. So this march actually wound itself through colleges of Delhi University, and there was a lot of aggression in the air, against the Sikhs.
Right.
And it was, of course, being orchestrated.
Totally.
It was being orchestrated, but it was also all kinds of, spontaneous ugliness that was coming out. So the march finally ended at Khalsa College, and there. the organizers were trying to start the meeting, and it wasn't happening. I mean, the atmosphere was very tense, and Safdar Hashmi, the theatre activist at that point, who had actually taught me this song, just whispered in my ear and said, "Please sing that song." And I was a young, brash teenager, and I turned around and I said, "But this is a song from the Second World War." So he said, "Please don't argue with me. And sing it. I'll explain to you why I think this is appropriate later."
Right.
And I sang that song. So I used to sing it. We used to sing it as me leading and with a chorus. And so I sang it, and people dropped to their knees, and there were lots and lots of these young men who were weeping and completely broke down when they heard the song.
Wow.
So that was, I mean, that subsequently has been written about, this incident, and it's so for me that was, I mean, you can imagine as a young, as a teenager, how impactful something, even now when I think about it,
Wells emotion.
So that was so that song therefore was always there at the back of my mind, and I was trying to think of how do I find more of those songs. So that's when I decided that okay, let me try and find out whether people from the IPTA of those times remember songs, who's around, and so on. So that's how that project started. I traveled all over the country, and in languages that I knew, I started meeting people, and I was fortunate because it was really the last few years that many of those people would be alive.
Sorry. Can I move the mic to the other lapel? It's sort of rubbing against your, closer to your. Let's see. Go ahead.
It should be okay.
No. Do you mind? Why is this upside down? Well, maybe I'll try this one up here, closer to you. Why did it not stay?
It's because of the shirt.
That's fine. Okay, that's perfect. So so that experience got you into looking for this other kind of protest song, one that is not about sort of rallying the people, but of trying to produce an emotional experience, and therefore having a different, and you described it as a cathartic experience. And so then you went on to work on music like this.
And once I started, then it was like a gold mine, in terms of material becoming available. Of course, it was very complicated to get to the material and all of that, and it's a long process where I had to also reconstruct a lot of songs. And
I see.
So
is that what is your thesis on this, on your book on IPTA? Like, I mean, you also write that one of the things you talk about, I think from what I understand, is that to recognize IPTA as kind of part of international 1920s, 30s, 40s movements, globally connected. Yes, I mean, this is another topic that I want to try and get into, is that you're strongly interested in transnationality.
Absolutely.
Yes. And what is there any correlation between sort of this transnationality in IPTA and similar thinking and the kind of music you're interested in?
Definitely, because what I did find once I started looking deeply into the music of the IPTA, again, what I tried to do was to actually find, and this is an obsession that I have, to find traces from within the music itself of something that might not be very obvious. So often listening to a song which might be very conventionally part of some tradition that we know of, but would have a hint of something else, and then you would suddenly say, oh, that sounds a little
like somewhere else,
like something else. And so that's a method that I use in my work a lot, this whole thing of sounds like, so yeah, so to a large extent to do with the nature of the archive itself and listening very carefully to the archive, but also collecting a lot of material around the musical archive,
Right.
which was, it could be pamphlets, it could be something, anything that was published, and of course also on the basis of the conversations that I had with the musicians when I met them.
Right.
I started putting together all this information, and it was very apparent to me that that this is something that's not isolated, neither isolated nor derivative.
Right.
So
that's an interesting thesis.
Sometimes there is this whole idea that the music that came out of the left movement was just imitating Soviet diktats. Or was Western. So there's also this thing that these are Western ideologies that have been.
This is a constant
imported.
problem.
Yeah.
So neither isolated nor derivative.
Yeah.
This is the best summary of an idea that I've also been sort of obsessed with. So what do you mean? Elaborate on that.
So for me, what I found was that the most fabulous artists of the time were with the IPTA, and there would have been a reason why they were there. Many left. There were issues that came up. There were debates. I mean, all that apart. But the very fact that they were trying to think of a radical imaginary in music, through their own creative ways, would mean that it's not something that can be just boxed in easily, or something that would submit to a diktat even if it did exist.
Okay.
So it's not easy to tell a Ravi Shankar to just imitate a Western tune or a Soviet tune, or Ravi Shankar was just one of the people who was with the IPTA, but there were so many others who continued to be with the IPTA and who also became very influential personalities culturally in India later on.
Right, of course.
They were not going to be just singing a song about Lenin, or just because there was an ideological sort of affinity with the Soviet movement or whatever it might be. So I started hearing a lot of things which were telling me that there were solidarities. And there were solidarities that were built up as part of the anti-war movement. There were solidarities that were built up as part of the global anti-fascist movement. There were solidarities that were also establishing links with the civil rights movement.
In the US.
In the US, with a lot of questions that artists were raising all over East Asia and Southeast Asia. So which is why I've talked about it as a radical impulse, and that's my major.
That's the title of the book.
The title of the book, and it's a concept that I'm using to basically talk about this kind of sweeping changes that came in the world of artistic expression in many parts of the world.
Right.
And they were influencing each other, but they were also, they were rooted very strongly in their own context.
Right.
So the multiple ways in which that combination of rootedness and internationalism can happen. I think the IPTA experience was really a fantastic example of that.
Oh, fantastic. This is so amazing. I love this formulation that you have. Because I also struggle with describing the same thing in the realm of architecture and architectural thinking, where again we constantly have to deal with this problem of if it looks a certain way, then it has to be derivative and Western. Otherwise, you somehow have to be sort of very narrowly indigenous or local or and there's no so I like the. Neither derivative nor isolated, and its characterization, you are saying, is a consequence of a kind of an international radical impulse, but one that nevertheless whose expression was not derived and not rooted in its locality, because that is how it would be successful. And the sheer range that I found was mind-boggling in terms of the experiments that artists. So do you think this thesis applies even to movements and music worldwide at that time?
I think so. At that time, yes, because between the 20s and the 50s, say what was unfolding in different parts of the world was quite astounding, actually. So for example, a lot of material from the Soviet Union itself, in the early days of the Soviet Union, was not known. It got kind of masked under the whole critiques of socialist realism and
Yeah.
the
Same in
the
architecture.
debates
By
that-
the way, you could be talking about architecture. I'm just going
Yeah.
to replace music with architecture.
Yeah, yeah.
It all applies.
I mean, I'm sure.
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
So, but it's only after the Soviet Union broke down and a lot of the archives became available, I think, that a lot of that material has come out.
I
So
see.
I've come up. I mean, I've looked at some absolutely stunning debates that took place in the 20s
20s.
around music.
20s
in the
was
Soviet
fantastic
Union.
time
Yeah.
in Soviet Union.
Yeah. And around the same time, the 20s, 30s, 40s, I mean, before the revolution in China, towards the build-up of the revolution, the kind of debates that were happening in Shanghai, for example, and which was involving artists moving from Japan and Korea and and congregating in Shanghai and looking at the whole idea of the relationship of Japan to Korea and the role of the Japanese in the in the whole fascism that was unfolding. I mean, these are all and the kind of insightful questions that Japanese artists were asking at that time.
Right.
And all of that was feeding very interestingly into India. I mean, like Tagore, for example,
Of course.
was so influenced by what was happening in that part of the world in Shantiniketan.
Right.
So I found
And he traveled to
places-
the West and he visited Bauhaus and
Yeah.
all these places and,
Yeah.
and invited the Bauhaus artists back to Shantiniketan and
Yeah. So I can imagine how intoxicating those times would have been
Yes,
in terms
yes.
of artistic expression.
Yeah.
And therefore, to locate the Indian experience as part of that whole large sweep of events,
Yeah.
but which was also very powerful and very, very
Specific, particular to India. Yeah.
particular to India, was quite exciting for me.
That's such a fantastic thesis.
Yeah.
Is there so? Have you also written about non-Indian topics along these lines about the other people, the Shanghai, Soviet Union?
Yes, in my book,
Yeah.
yes, in the Radical Impulse,
Yeah.
I have a whole chapter on the international, the Radical Impulse and how it unfolded internationally. So
Okay.
I've tried to look at some of these links.
I see.
That-
Did you also connect across to the civil rights movements
Yes.
in the United States,
Yes.
Latin America?
Yeah. So I've looked also conceptually at what radical music means. How does it get defined in terms of musicological categories and all of
I
that?
see.
And also distinctions. This whole distinction which is supposedly there between the classical and the folk, and
unquestionable.
and how all these questions are being taken up by different social movements. So Latin America comes up as a very interesting example, early part of the 20th century again,
Right.
where this whole question of folk, quote unquote, is being debated, and how unearthing forms that belong to the people, quote unquote, again,
Right.
and performing them on public stages, folk revivals and so on that take place in Latin America.
Yeah.
In many countries in Latin America, I've written about that.
So, do you think sort of a radicalism, a kind of a grassroots impulse, is necessary for this kind of an internationalism, rooted internationalism in music, or do you think it is a general characteristic of that period and its thinking?
A difficult question. But I mean, I can only say that there are moments when this happens. There is an upsurge, and that upsurge is something that acquires these kinds of dynamic proportions, which I observed for that period.
Yeah.
When it comes from the grassroots, or when there's that kind of upsurge. I mean, there's only so much that state-led and top-led initiatives can do. But it is when there are these upsurges that come from people who experience repression, people who experience marginalization,
right,
that throws up this kind of a radical imaginary, and that doesn't happen very often, but
right.
It's definitely necessary.
I mean, I'm trying to correlate to the general thinking about the modern architecture movement, which relied on the narrative of the avant-garde and so on, even in the Soviet Union, to produce, I would call, what you're calling rooted internationalism, or I'm just making this up as a term. which in only had broadly kind of leftist leanings. It wasn't sort of rigorously protest work, but it's interesting nevertheless to think about it. And I always think about the debates between Adorno and the sort of jazz music. You remember sort of this sad episode from the Frankfurt School, but I don't want to go there. But where I wanted to take this is this question of, but this is not a characteristic of, is it a characteristic of modernity and modernism? Or you've also done work on pre-colonial history and particularly connections between Africa, the African continent and the South Asian subcontinent. So how did you move on to from the 20s and 50s to pre-colonial history? What happened here?
Yeah, again, that was through music. Because so while I was working on the IPTA, and I came across this tradition from your part of the world, Punjab. The heer.
The heer
as a form.
The heer you sang was, that moved me more than anything else. Because it was Punjabi, I picked up some of it.
Yeah. So the heer, as you would know better than me, perhaps is a lament.
It's a lament.
It's a lament,
beautiful
and
lament.
which is associated with the heer rancha love story. But the heer as a form becomes a very easily employable form for songwriters to use when lamenting something. Yeah.
And Faiz did this with brilliance, right? I mean, all his songs were supposedly about the lost love, but they were all about the lost red love.
Yeah. So, or Amrita Pritam when she writes after partition,
fantastic.
I mean, Varish Shah, you must be weeping at your grave and so on.
Right.
So actually, there was a song from the Bengal famine, which was in the form of the heer, and which I it was part of my collection. And as I started singing that, and again, as I said, for me, all of these things come from the act of performing itself to a very large extent. So the Punjabi Sufi philosopher, singer Madan Gopal Singh is the person who taught me how to sing that heer.
Okay.
Because he looked at it and he said, this is a classic 18th century form, and this is how the heer Varish Shah is sung. And so he taught me how to sing it. I don't speak Punjabi. I mean, I understand it to some extent.
Right.
So I needed to get the nuances right of how to sing a heer.
Yeah.
And as I started listening more and more to different kinds of heer, somehow, I think it was just through the internet, I started listening to a lot of related melodies. And these related melodies were seeming to suggest that they were following some kind of a path.
Related melodies, things that sounded similar or same content?
No, sounded similar.
Sounded similar
in terms of tune. And then I started, listening more carefully. So and I found that you can hear very similar melodies, stretching. If we begin from northwestern India, and then of course, I mean, when I say India, it also Pakistan, that's an artificial
South Asian,
yeah. So we move along, Afghanistan and all of that, and go into Iran and West Asia, the whole range of countries that are there in West Asia, in the Mediterranean, sort of Palestine, Israel.
So these are the
Greece,
maps
Lebanon.
of sorrow you're talking about in your new book?
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah. So actually, and then also certain kinds of flamenco.
That I've so many times heard.
Yeah.
I mean, flamenco sounds totally like Indian music.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, I started having a conversation with my collaborator Ari Sitas, with whom I've written this book. And we were in conversation about various other things, and we were doing work together. And so when I mentioned this, and he heard the heer, he said, "Oh, this sounds very familiar." And from where I come from, and he's from Cyprus, and so Greek Cypriot, and so it sounds very much like our kind of music. And he's mentioned a form called amanes, which is a lament. And so we started putting pieces of the puzzle together.
Lovely.
And then we discovered this piece by Lorca.
The playwright.
Yeah,
Yeah.
written in 1922 called The Deep Song.
Okay.
And where he was talking actually about exactly this. And he talked about the deep song as being a certain kind of, and he also wrote a long poem called the Deep Song. He was talking about this music which probably has its origins in ancient India. He was speculating. He didn't live very long after that, after he wrote this piece. And to say that that's it's about deep longing and so that was a kind of a clue. And and so these melodies are found also then into North Africa as well, to some extent into Western Africa.
So you're saying this is a characteristic of this song, this particular song type?
Yeah, so this is just an example. This is just an example, and that was really something that provided us the lens to look into music, which would have connected cultures from pre-colonial times onwards.
So this is also a kind of internationalism, right?
Absolutely. So and so yeah. So I mean, so that was one kind of melody, but then subsequently, when we started looking at it, and then it became a big project, and which involved not just music, but also a lot of historical work, a lot of archaeological work, where people have been trying to reconstruct these relationships between Africa and Asia from pre-colonial times, and to see how societal formations got linked with each other, even while being deeply rooted.
Right.
So the same.
So those
kind
are
of
not
thing,
contradictions, is the point.
Those are not contradictions. So which is not to say that therefore, because people were traveling all over the Indian Ocean from millennia,
forever,
that these cultures were just responding to what might be called these Indian Ocean cosmopolitanisms, but these are also cultures which are deeply rooted with what is happening inside. But suddenly you can see this, you can hear this flavor, you can hear this, you can hear this tune, or find. I mean, of course, so many architects have looked at the Indian Ocean as
who has looked at? I want to know.
Well, I do know there are people who are looking at. I would say historians, perhaps. I mean,
historians.
But like, for example, doorways. Doorways. How the traditional links between Western India and East Africa have influenced the way in which doorways
are constructed.
Constructed. I've seen something in Zanzibar.
Okay.
Which says
and these are pre-colonial links.
The pre-colonial links are getting reflected in the way in which, of course, the doorways are not from pre-colonial times, would be in colonial times, I guess, at best. But designs and things like that.
Sure.
So,
I mean, the one thing that I've thought about, which I've never been able to historically verify, but maybe falls into the category of resonances, as you're talking about, is, rock cut architecture. So we have, of course, an old tradition of rock cut architecture. There's rock cut architecture in Persia from Achaemenid's time. And then you go to Africa and you see Lalibela and the huge rock cut churches from the 8th, 9th, 10th century.
Yeah.
So how did all this happen? There has to be, global rootedness.
Yeah. There must have been, because I mean, definitely migration was happening.
Was happening.
So whether it's the Silk Route, or whether it's the Indian Ocean routes, or whether it's the Red Sea trade routes, or whatever people are moving around. So you do see those traces in objects.
Right.
The problem with musical objects is that they biodegrade. So instruments are very difficult to find. But in our project, we've actually
but music lives forever, no?
Musically, exactly. Yeah. So the music itself, but then how do you find the music is not written down, so how do you actually find the evidence? It is in terms of survival.
Yes, survival. It's sort of detective, intuitive, not intuitive, but sort of genealogical work, musical genealogies.
Yeah. So there's I mean, these are all very well established methodologies now.
Yeah.
And but it was exciting for us to actually, look at all these things, which really began with one tune, in a certain sense.
I see.
Which
tune?
The Heer.
The Heer. Yeah. Okay. So your work on the what you call, what is it, the ensemble that you have,
Yeah.
the what's it called,
Insurrections
insurrections
ensemble.
ensemble,
Yeah, yeah.
which aspires to correct to what is it, to reconnect, to revive, or
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
rebuild,
to respond.
respond.
To respond musically through um, yeah, I mean through our own rootedness in our trainings and our cultures,
Mm.
but to be able to listen to the other in and
So what, Jawab
respond.
Sawal, or jamming together, or how
Yeah.
do you all work?
We
So tell me first about what is the insurrections ensemble?
Yeah, so again, so that's one of the projects that Ari Sitas and I again co-founded.
Yeah.
So it was initially a gathering of poets and musicians
Uh-huh.
from India and South Africa specifically,
Okay.
where we were trying to respond to a lot of the issues that were coming up. I mean, again, not in a concrete way. There was disquiet
No.
in the air.
Right.
Whether it
When
was
did
in
this
terms of
start?
2011,
2011,
Our conversation started around 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
And then we formed the ensemble by 2010.
Okay.
And from 2011 onwards, we've actually been working
Okay.
and performing.
Okay.
So it's a group of poets who write lines, in response to something
Some event.
that has happened.
Ah.
Yeah, and then as musicians we respond to those lines, and then we also create our own stuff. So the major thing that we found was that musicians from India and South Africa very rarely meet each other,
Right.
except through the West, if at
Except through Paul Simon or something.
yeah, either that or curated by
some
by an event in London or
Yeah,
New
yeah,
York
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah,
wherever.
yeah. That's true.
You
That's
know,
true.
and
Yeah, I'm putting together an exhibition which is again being curated from the West.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah.
But when we started, having these musical conversations,
Yeah.
Sawal Jawab, you can say to some
Uh-huh.
extent, it could just be that, hey, listen, what do you think of this tune? And you play it, and then you hear somebody respond to it in an interesting way. So our process has been about co-composition.
Co-composition.
Yeah, rather than fusion, as I was saying. I mean, fusion. Any skilled musician can do fusion. You can, or any skilled musician.
Explain. I'm not a musician. What does this mean?
Yeah, that that I sing something and somebody else sings something from their training, and then we bring it together, and we call it fusion.
Okay.
When we are saying co-composition, it is actually in that are the way in which we sing or produce music is responding structurally to what the other is doing.
I see.
So I mean, at some point, fusion could be composition as well.
Okay.
But I just don't like the term fusion.
Oh, I see.
It's just that you put two musicians together, you can have fusion.
Right.
If your ears open.
I completely relate to you. I mean, in my discipline, my problem with fusion or hybridization, as we call it here, is that it assumes that there is a sort of a singular airtight thing here and an airtight thing there,
exactly.
and then we're going to sort of melange it and make a salad.
Yeah.
Whereas I think what you're describing is, which is also, I think, mirrors my experience with thinking about architecture. There are never any airtight containers to begin with. That doesn't deny rootedness and difference.
Yeah.
But the idea is to look for, is to sort of build on the entanglements that are already there, and sort of develop on those. Is that similar to?
Absolutely. Oh. That's exactly what we've tried to do. And our work has been mostly thematic. Often, so our productions are based on some theme or an idea, and then we work around and produce, create a production around an idea.
I see. So create a production, you will get together at one place and produce a series of...
It's a very expensive process because there are people involved and we don't get any funding.
Tell me about it. Yeah. Everything I do is also zero funding.
Yeah. So often what happens is that, the ensemble tries to meet once a year or definitely once in 2 years,
Mm.
and we get together for just about a week or so,
Mm.
including performance. So, but then there's also a lot of work that goes into, which is done online
Yeah.
usually,
Yeah,
and
the
then we
prep.
send each other material, and then we, and then we meet in intensive workshops for 3 or 4 days,
Mm.
produce a whole performance and perform it.
And perform it.
And perform
And
it.
travel.
Well, that's the difficult part.
Yeah.
Wherever we can, we travel.
I see.
So the ensemble has come to India twice, both times to the Kochi Biennale, and once once to a theatre festival in Thrissur in Kerala, and another in the previous year that it came, we went performed in the Serendipity Festival in Goa.
I see. I
So,
see.
yeah, but that's a very expensive, and so unless we actually have a sponsor who's
So you
willing
need to get on the concert circuit with the Indian Ocean and so on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's big money if you can get on.
Yeah. But
And also have you come to the West and performed the ensemble?
No, I tried this
You
time
tried?
while I'm here. Whether we could, but it couldn't be managed. Again, the funding was very difficult.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but it's something that we are interested in, and we are trying to have conversations with people in the US to see whether.
Did you talk to the ethnomusicology people here?
Not really, but
Okay.
yeah, I will.
Because I would imagine they'd be very interested in it.
But somebody has to put in the funding.
The funding, no, you'd
Yeah.
have funding or you'd have grants. This is a
I know.
$3 billion institution.
Yeah, well, I hope, yeah, that will
Yeah, that'd
happen.
be wonderful.
Yeah.
I see. So you do think I'm so inspired by this because I have a series of really good friends in South Africa and in Nigeria.
Mm.
And every time we meet, we say, we have to have this South-South conversation and South-South dialogue and South-South this thing.
Yeah.
But it never happens. Every time we meet, we are in London or,
Exactly. That's
Amsterdam
exactly
or something like this.
Yeah.
And so therefore you shouldn't come to UW because that would only repeat that same.
I like being here, honestly. So, yeah.
I see. That's amazing and fascinating. Maybe we should formulate a transdisciplinary event in South Africa or something, and we can tag on to your music format and bring out a bunch of architects and artists also.
Yeah, absolutely.
And create maybe Insurrection's mega ensemble.
So we've worked with visual artists.
You have?
Yeah, we've worked with visual artists, and we have 2 productions in which we had absolutely amazing puppetry. Or in the sense, puppets being created. So this, amazing artist from South Africa called Jill Joubert.
Okay.
She's a very well-known sculptor, puppeteer. She has been associated with our project for the past, for 2 productions. And she's produced this whole variety. She, with her team, have produced this whole variety of puppets ranging from the tiniest, one which you can keep next to your coffee cup, to massive
big
ones,
street
and
size almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Which have been part of the whole visual imagery of the production. And so we've worked with visual artists. We've worked with animators, and so 2 of our productions actually had a lot of animation and actual puppet work as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking, we can sort of, tag along and run a parallel architecture and visual thinking ensemble.
Yeah.
And it's such an amazing idea. I've never thought about co-creating architecture with my buddies. Although this Office of Uncertainty Research, I think that you've seen, it's kind of a co-creation, but it's definitely a co-creation. And we talk about it, my collaborator Mark Jarsenbeck and I, like what is it that we are doing now? Because he's this sort of neurotic Jewish kid from Cincinnati running from the Holocaust, and I'm from South Asia, Indian modernism from the great city of Le Corbusier, Nehruvian
Yes, of course.
ethos.
Yeah.
And what is it that we are doing together? And I think it's a kind of what you're talking about. It's sort of trying to burrow into these sort of deep body resonances, nevertheless, that link us.
Yeah.
Although we couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
In biography, in background.
Yeah.
But I have to ask you this. I have a lot of friends in what is the NGO sector in India, and their mantra and sort of deep slogan is local populations, local people, locally produced everything. So how does this internationalism and transnational thinking sit with them? I mean, how do you sort of parse these conversations in your deeply leftist circles?
Yeah, I mean, I think internationalism per se is not antithetical to this, in the sense that
I often get the sense from a lot of these people it is. They hate modernism.
Okay,
in
that sense.
Yeah,
but I think I mean, I can definitely say that in music. Ever since I've been hammering a lot of these points. Initially, there was a lot of resistance. Because everyone wanted their own authentic to be represented.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's all about the local authentic.
Yeah. And so everyone wanted me to be reproducing a Fairs song in just the way they imagined a Fairs song should be reproduced. Which would be some version of authentic. And for me, that was a very difficult thing, in the sense that it was not something that I wanted to engage with as an idea. I mean, I have no problem in maintaining authenticity. So, for example, when I sing songs that I've collected, I try not to change the tunes. That's just a personal thing.
I mean, that's a question of heritage. I mean, in a sense that I try not to change everything that I got from my father. That's just one generation.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that I'm going to be playing it for you in exactly the way in which you imagine it. In terms of so whether it is in terms of reproducing a certain kind of a instrumental combination with it, or bringing in foreign elements. This whole thing about
foreign elements of recently they found out the harmonium comes from France. And there's this whole movement to take out harmoniums from gurdwaras. For instance, have you heard
really?
that? Yes, I heard.
Well, this is an old debate in India, because in the 50s the harmonium was banned from All India Radio.
Really?
Yeah.
Nehruji banned it.
For exactly the same reason, that it's a foreign instrument. And people like Salil Chaudhary and all had written saying that the harmonium, if at all, is an Indian instrument, because it's not played anywhere else.
That's right. Nobody explains.
Yeah. So and they were, in fact, Salil Chaudhary wrote an article about
on the harmonium.
And also demonstrating how what you can actually do.
I was astonished to learn that it's not Indian.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same way, the chai is not Indian.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So whereas everyone in the West wants to drink chai tea as Indian.
Chai tea as
Indian.
It?
So, yeah. So for me, I mean, for me, a lot of it, the proof of it is in the eating of it. I mean, tell me that this is foreign, from the way it sounds. I mean,
I'm with you. What I'm asking you, how do you deal with the
this is exactly
critics?
This is exactly how I deal with it. This is exactly how I deal with it. That look, this is it. So when Bhupen Hazarika writes the song about the Brahmaputra or about the Ganga, almost reproducing Paul Robeson's tune. Okay, but it's completely different. Nobody ever challenged him saying this is a non-Indian song. So just by demonstrating something like that, I think one can really unpack this whole thing of whether something is Indian or
That's
foreign
right. That's
or
right.
whatever it is. And if people are not willing to listen even beyond that, then there's nothing to
Right.
be said.
Right. Right.
You know?
No, I'm so with you. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why it's so amazing
Yeah.
that you are so rooted in the sort of leftist local politics and that sort of ethos.
Yeah.
But nevertheless working with this sort of strong internationalism, because that my sense is, and I'm very outdated. I haven't really been involved with local, organizations and people in India now for 2 decades or more. That the whole left NGO sector used to be very.
No, I think things have changed.
Yeah.
And things have changed, and young people have pushed the boundaries. So even with again, I can keep talking about music. Is that if you look at a lot of the rap music that's coming out of India?
Yeah, that's right.
And who are also a lot of these artists are associated with movements. I mean, I'm not just talking about the commercial rappers and who have nothing to do with politics in that sense, but there are a lot of these rappers who are actually singing about social questions, and quite deeply and provocatively, and they are making this point that our rap is Indian rap.
Absolutely.
And it's indigenous, so I think somewhere even in organizations and all of that, people are opening their ears.
Right. Yeah, no, I always insist that English is an Indian language and
Exactly.
cricket is a national sport. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
But, the other thing is, even though I know street Punjabi, I can't say, I am well versed with the sort of ethos of Punjabi. So, I'm just making the argument as the alternate crit, I mean, we run the risk, it's easy for you and me to have this conversation in English, but we are paying a price nevertheless, of not sort of investing in more. There is some erasures that are happening because we are having this conversation in English, which is a criticism that they make, that therefore you are going to lose some Punjabi and some Punjabiyat in this process. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I think it would be a very severe kind of an erasure if these conversations were happening only in English.
Sure.
The fact that these conversations are not happening only in English, is and that has to be there. It has to go into the languages that people speak on a daily basis,
That's
and
right.
It has to engage. So that it's not possible to make an impact beyond a certain level,
right,
or even make an argument beyond a certain level by just remaining with English,
Yeah.
or remaining with Hindi for that matter.
Or remaining with Hindi for that
I
matter.
have to be able to engage in Malayalam,
That's
wherever
right.
it is possible.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
and not just Malayalam, but also with it's not just about language, but it's also being able to come across to groups of people who don't have the kind of advantages that we have in terms of,
Right.
the ability to formulate an argument and so
Yeah.
on. So
Yeah.
I've tried to do that as much as possible. I don't try
Yeah.
not to say no to an engagement which is with communities which are not traditionally part of either a political or a academic or a urban kind of background. Yeah.
Okay, as we start moving towards the end here, kya hua? What happened? I mean, you talked many times 30s to the 50s, 60s. Although you have said now the young people are sort of sticking to what happened to this project internationally, but particularly in India, this kind of thinking. How did we end up it seems like very different places now, politically and even perhaps culturally.
Yeah, well, I mean, culturally, I think after a point, all kinds of dogmatism came in. Dogmatism and kind of reductionist ideas about what music for social change means, which also meant that the people were trying to say ki aise hi hona chahiye, waise hi hona chahiye, and so on. Of course, moments like this where very big artists, for example, and serious artists are part of something that doesn't produce any money, you can't last very long either. So then, some of it is also because people had their own lives, and political movements or social movements after a point did not think culture itself was such a necessary thing. And this is something that I've written about as well, that a lot of it became the entertainment department. So you ask a singer to sing before a public meeting, and you can even shut the singer out and say, "Oh, our leader has arrived." I've had this experience several times.
Really?
Yeah. So that can happen, and there are problems that come from the artists also. About how much do you how do you look at the notion of the collective, and so all of these things happened, and over a period of time it just became more boring, is what I can say. But I really think
formulaic and so
it dies down. So then it gets limited to a certain number of people who would be the flag bearers in some sense, and which is not unimportant, but it gets limited in terms of the range of creativity that one is talking about. Where did we end up like this? I mean, despite that, I think in India in the last 10 years, 10 or 15 years, I would say, there has been a revival of all kinds of cultural forms.
I get the echo of this, yes.
And things have been brutally suppressed, as you know. But despite that, there has been quite a huge upsurge. So,
what is the cause of this upsurge?
Because of events.
I mean, I'm thinking of Jashn-e Ekta and all kinds of things.
Oh yes, all of that is there, and also like as I was saying, bands that are singing about all kinds of social issues all over the country. Amazing stuff, amazing stuff, and they are willing to go there, put their neck on the line, and go to venues where later on they might not get their commercial gigs after performing at those venues, and so on. So people are just responding to events. And if you look at it, there's so much. I mean, like.
Do you think this is a sort of a protest movement to the sort of turn to the right in Indian politics?
You mean
the last 10-15 years?
Yes,
you think it's a response to that?
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And also the environmental movement has produced lots of stuff. So questions. So Dalit movement, for example, has produced a lot of very interesting cultural stuff, which is responding to the issues that the movement itself is raising in different parts of the country. So there's also a lot of stuff happening on the right.
Of course. Huge amount happening
on the right. So there is that contestation, which is, I think, quite powerful here. And it's not dead at all.
It's not dead at all.
No, not at all.
So culture is alive and well.
Absolutely. And so even if there is a lot of attempt to beat it down, and these, it's still continuing. A lot of it is under the radar, but it's quite amazing actually if you look for it carefully.
Okay, well, you have inspired me, Sumangala, because if it's there in music, and I think reasonably in painting, I'm not really so sure. Then maybe it's also in architecture. I'll have to go and look for it.
Well, design, definitely, there's so much interesting stuff happening.
There is?
Yeah.
I see in fashion there's a lot of stuff happening. I don't know so much about design.
I mean, I know of designers who are doing very interesting things.
Really?
So I mean, not that I know very deeply, but still.
But still. Like who? We don't have to go there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay. No. I was going to say, to sort of round this up.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while of it, probably a good length.
Yeah.
Is if it's happening in music.
Yeah.
Then it must be happening in design and architecture.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
So it's my project. I'm going to come to India and I'm going to start following you around, and wherever there are musicians, I'll look for the designers and the architects. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll find the Desi ensemble.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then connect it to Africa. So thank you so very much for coming out here.
This was a lovely conversation.
Lovely conversation. I enjoyed it so very much. Thank you.
Thank you.